Who's going to be the starting quarterback for the New York Jets in 2023? Of course, they have their in-house options to consider: Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, and Strevler, but they haven't exactly set the world on fire with the New York Jets this season. So what leads us to believe that they're any closer to being the answer for the Jets going forward at the most important position in football of quarterback? Now, of course, they could go free agency, bringing in a Jimmy Garoppolo. They could trade for a guy like Derek Carr if he's still on the Las Vegas Raiders roster. If he gets outright released into free agency, then maybe they could bring him in. They could go for one of the journeyman backups that's out there. Every year there seems to be a guy like a Teddy Bridgewater, etc., that's available. You could go that route, but again, that's not exactly exciting the fan base either. They could go in the draft and try to draft a really highly touted quarterback, trade up in the draft, go after a guy like C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, maybe a Will Levis. There's a lot of options. Let's kind of break it all down. First and foremost, where are they right now? Strevler, of course, isn't a factor in the quarterback discussion, in my opinion. Neither is Joe Flacco. He's more of a stopgap option, kind of a backup, journeyman backup who can step in for a game or two and save you, maybe get you a win, etc. But he's not exactly going to be, your starting quarterback that's going to win you 10, 11 games in a season. At this point, I wouldn't be shocked if he retired, honestly. He's still a decent backup, but the Jets should not be looking at him as a possibility to be a starting quarterback for them. Now, Mike White, he played with the most juice this season, definitely provided them with the most energy. He is a little brittle, though. We saw him take multiple hits to the ribs. That offensive line was a work in progress this season, so that's not all on him. But he definitely was more of a gamer. Reminds me more of a productive Taylor Heineke. But again, that's not exactly a Justin Herbert, a Patrick Mahomes, a Josh Allen. The Jets need their franchise quarterback, and he doesn't appear to be that guy. But maybe he could be, a top 20 quarterback in the league if given the starting job, possibly. But I don't think you're getting into the top 15. Now, of course, that leaves them with Zach Wilson, the guy that basically was arrogant from day one when he came into the job. Highly touted prospect coming in. Everybody thought he had all the arm talent in all the world, and he just kind of fell on his face. Never really got anything going. The defense was more of the calling card of this team. Once again, we've seen this song and dance before from the New York Jets. Think back to the Mark Sanchez days when he first got the call anyway to be the starting quarterback. Rex Ryan basically led that defense. That defense was the reason why they made it as far as they did in the playoffs when Rex Ryan was still there as head coach. Now that defense is almost as good as that was back then. And now they just don't have any quarterback to really rely on. And I don't think Zach Wilson can be relied on either. I mean, the locker room issues that he had, basically he lost the locker room towards the end of this past season, and it just doesn't look good for Zach Wilson to remain the starter for any length of time there. I think it's just time for the organization and player to move on. I think he might get traded for possibly a 6th, 7th round pick at this point. It's not going to cost a whole lot to bring him in. Another team might take a chance on him, say, hey, we have our long-term guy right now, but he's aging, so maybe we'll take this guy under our wing, set him on the bench for a couple of years, and maybe we have something and can get something out of his potential. But the Jets are not in that boat. They need a quarterback right now, and Zach Wilson has proven to not be the guy. Now, free agency, the guy I'm really interested in is Jimmy Garoppolo. Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo are very similar in that they're high completion percentage guys that try to complete passes, try to move the chains. They're not exactly the dynamic player that some of the coaches out there prefer. Throw the ball down the field 30 yards, etc. Try to get the big play over the top. And while they can do it occasionally, they're trying to move the chains, rely on that run game, rely on their defense, which is why Jimmy Garoppolo, I think, is the perfect fit for what the Jets are right now. Their defense is great. Breece Hall looks like the real deal as far as a running back. They have really good weapons on the outside, multiple weapons out there. Not that any of them are a guy like Tyreek Hill or anything like that, but they all can hold their own, and maybe one of those guys can blossom into that someday. But right now, they're a run-first team with a defense that's ready to go. They need a quarterback to come in there and not turn over the ball, and that's exactly what Jimmy Garoppolo brings. Now, of course, he had his injury issue at the end of this past season with the San Francisco 49ers, but you saw how he performed coming in with no training camp, literally being told, hey, don't even show up. We don't want you around for the entirety of training camp. And then saying, hey, we weren't able to trade you, so go ahead and take a pay cut. We'll take an incentive-laden deal, and then was thrust into the starting role after Trey Lance got hurt after a few weeks. And he didn't look bad for right from the beginning. He looked rusty because he literally hadn't played football in almost 8 months, and they were asking him to pretty much do the impossible, and that they have done. The 49ers right now are sitting comfortably in a playoff spot, could possibly even get the number 1 seed if things break their way this weekend, but if they don't, they're still going to be a 2 or 3 seed. Either way, All of that can be thanks to Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, of course, they still have a really good run game. They brought in Christian McCaffrey. That defense is legit. They have good weapons on the outside. Ayuk has certainly taken a step forward this year. Kittle's certainly bounced back as well. And now Brock Purdy seems to have taken over the reins right now after the injury to Jimmy Garoppolo, which is why I don't really see a path back to San Francisco for Jimmy Garoppolo. So maybe, just maybe, you can get him and it won't cost you anything to be able to, make another trade for a guy like Russell Wilson, the Denver Broncos trade last year. You don't want to do that if you're the Jets organization. You don't want to hamstring this organization from a draft pick perspective. You also want to have money available to go out in free agency for the salary cap. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to cost you $45 million. I think he might cost you anywhere between 20 to 35, somewhere in there, depending on how strongly you believe Jimmy Garoppolo could be your guy. Say you get him for a 3-year deal, $30 million per, something like that, maybe even a little bit more, and then you have very productive quarterback giving you exactly what you need. And by the way, the head coach there in New York also came from the San Francisco 49ers in Robert Saleh. He, of course, was the defensive coordinator there, so Jimmy Garoppolo may have at least had some conversations with him in the past that show some familiarity. Hey, I at least know who I'm going to be, who's the head coach I'm going to have going to New York, and so maybe, just maybe, Jimmy Garoppolo would be comfortable going there. Now, the other option that I mentioned was Derek Carr. Derek Carr, of course, more of a completion percentage guy, even more so than Jimmy Garoppolo, but we saw over the last couple of years the offensive line with the Las Vegas Raiders wasn't exactly holding up as much as it had in the past. We also saw a whole bunch of turmoil in the past. We saw the John Gruden era come to a unceremonious conclusion, we'll put it that way. But you saw when he had an offensive-minded coach like Gruden, his numbers were significantly better. His QBR was around 64, I want to say, and now since John Gruden is out of there, his QBR is around 52 to 56. And so you can kind of see when you have an offensive-minded coach, somebody that you're comfortable with, you can build a rapport with, Derek Carr succeeds. I wonder if he's going to be as successful wherever he goes. Remember, Saleh is a defensive-minded head coach. I'm not sure that's the right fit for Derek Carr, but you need somebody to come in there and be able to move the chains, and anybody right now would be better than Zach Wilson, I believe, in a New York Jets uniform. Now, of course, the draft option. I would not like this option if I'm a Jets fan, primarily because it's going to cost you multiple draft picks in the future. Right now, they currently sit at number 13 in the draft. They could range anywhere between 10 and 14, depending on how the final week of the season unfolds. But for all intents and purposes, they're going to be outside of that top 10, trying to draft one of the top 3 quarterbacks in this draft, all of which are expected to go inside of the top 10. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means quarterbacks are always overdrafted. You're going to have to probably get into the top 5, maybe even the top 4 or 3 to be able to get one of those quarterbacks. Now, does that mean picks 1, 2, and 3 are all going to be quarterbacks? Absolutely not, but it just means at pick number 13, they are all going to be gone. That's going to cost you at least a first-round pick next year in order to be able to bring one of those guys in. You're on the verge of building a really good team right now. Your defense is starting to click. Your weapons on the outside are looking good. You need to build up that offensive line a little bit, and so I want to use one of those first-round picks that you have over the next couple of years on an offensive tackle, somebody who can take over some of the aging guys that they have on their roster. The other issue that they have to worry about is still the quarterback. And if you spend 2 draft picks on your quarterback, even if he is the guy, you haven't solved your offensive line issues. That's going to cause issues for the draft pick that you do bring in. And so maybe you get one of these, multifaceted quarterbacks that can scramble and roll out of the pocket like Young or Stroud. But again, you wonder about their long-term health if you're not able to provide a good offensive line in front of them, and you don't necessarily want to sink all of your salary cap into an offensive line in front of him when you haven't been able to draft and develop it over the years. Now, of course, Mekhi Becton was out this past year because of injury. They brought in Dwayne Brown. I wonder how things are going to look from what they have already in-house on that offensive line. But just strictly looking at the quarterbacks that are available, Will Levis is looked at as the top overall option here. Big arm, but can try to force the ball in there when it's not really there. Reminds me a lot of what the quarterbacks they already have on their roster is. I'm not going to say that that's what Will Levis will ultimately be. I'm just saying the New York Jets right now aren't ready for a quarterback like that. They've seen how that works right now with the system they currently have, and Levis is probably a better player than their options that they currently have and could perform better, of course. But they need somebody who can be able to move the chains, and Will Levis, that's not his strong suit right now. Of course, you always have to worry about the learning curve with young quarterbacks as well. Now, as far as Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, more athletic quarterbacks, if you will, able to scramble, move the pocket, be able to, complete or be able to move the ball down the field a little bit more. Bryce Young is very good as far as reading progressions. Be very good for that team to be able to bring him in. But they are again a run-first offense right now with a really good defense. Is he ready to be able to plug in there, manage the game for the first couple of years, get them into the postseason, maybe to a Super Bowl in year 3? I'm not sure he's the guy either, just because you'd still have to build on that offensive line after you make the trade to be able to bring him in. And then, of course, you still have to worry about he's a rookie quarterback. Same thing with CJ Stroud. I think he probably has a little bit higher ceiling out of the two, just because I think he hasn't been asked to do as much as Bryce Young was asked to do in Alabama. They're still very comparable players, though I like both of them. But for the New York Jets, I think the veteran route is probably the best way to go. Plus, they don't have to sink $40+ million into their quarterback spot, whereas other teams like the Dallas Cowboys have sunk over $40 million in a guy like Dak Prescott. Kirk Cousins, you remember that contract that got him to Minnesota in the first place from the Washington Commanders? Something like that is what I ultimately expect Jimmy Garoppolo to ultimately sign for. And getting him into back into the East Coast, maybe he's got a little bit more familiarity with it, gets a little bit more comfortable as well. The head coach, again, he's familiar with. So if I'm the New York Jets fan base, I want Jimmy Garoppolo. And I know he's not exactly the world's sexiest name out there, but he's exactly what the New York Jets need this offseason. Would you love to have one of those rookie quarterbacks fall to you at number 13 if you're the New York Jets? Absolutely. But you can't count on Jimmy Garoppolo waiting around until May in order to sign with the team. He is going to be picked up quickly as soon as free agency opens, so you're going to have to make this decision before the draft. Now, if you decide, hey, I want to go the draft route, you're going to have to trade up to get into that top 5 to get the guy you want. You're going to have to sacrifice a pick next year in the first round to be able to do that kind of a thing. Plus, now you're going to have to build in the offensive line through free agency, as opposed to spending money elsewhere with that with the salary cap space that you might have had. Breece Hall looked fantastic last year, but again, they have some question marks behind him. Do they continue to stick with Michael Carter? Do they go another route with a backup spot with Breece Hall? And again, going with a guy who's already ready to go with a defense that looks as good as it is right now. Sauce Gardner is probably one of the best, if not the absolute best cornerback in the NFL right now. Remember Revis Island all those years ago with Rex Ryan anyway, as head coach of the Jets anyway. They now have their new Darrelle Revis, and they don't want to spoil that cheap contract right now by ruining it on a rookie quarterback who's going to need time to mature in the NFL. Now, sure, could he have one of these rookies have a great season, be the Ben Roethlisberger, and win it in their rookie year? Sure, but that's foolhardy to say that that's a likely scenario in any one of these cases for Levis, Stroud, or Young. So again, I'm putting my money in the basket of Jimmy Garoppolo. Let us know in the comment section which quarterback you would prefer the Jets to go after. Hey, maybe you think, hey, Zach Wilson needs another chance with the Jets. He was taken out of the job too quickly. You need to give him another season. He's only been in the NFL for a couple years. Maybe you're a Mike White guy. He was formerly a Dallas Cowboys draft pick. He's been a real gamer. He's able to throw the ball down the field. He's not afraid of the game itself or of the moment, any moment that he's in. He looks really comfortable in there as quarterback, but of course you have the injury issues, so maybe that's your hesitation there. Maybe you're a Joe Flacco guy and say, hey, the guy's won a Super Bowl. The guy's, 40+ years old at this point? He's not exactly somebody I'd be counting on for the future of my franchise. But maybe as a backup, sure. Streveler, again, not discussing that. That's not even a point of contention right now for the New York Jets. So again, let us know in the comment section who you guys would think. Do you think they should go with one of their homegrown guys that they currently have? Should they go with Garoppolo, Carr? Should they go with one of the draft guys, Levis, Young, or Stroud? Let us know in the comment section. Make sure you hit that like on this video and follow us here at the Upside Sports Network for all the latest from the NFL.